April 16, 2006, Yusfia, south of Baghdad. In the darkness of Iraq's so-called Triangle of Death, there were no small quadcopters hanging over alleyways, no live satellite Blue Force display telling men exactly where they stood, and no easy certainty about who was inside the next building. There was only a target area shaped by fragments, intercepted calls, pattern analysis, human sources, aerial imagery, and the judgment of operators who had learned that in Iraq, the difference between a dead end and a breakthrough could be a single doorway entered at the right time. On that night, a British SAS squadron moved toward a farmhouse tied to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, part of a relentless manhunt that had already consumed months of raids, surveillance, and false trails. American Special Operations Forces, including Delta Force, had been hammering the same network. They had generated pressure, killed fighters, and pulled intelligence from earlier operations, but the decisive lead had still not fully materialized. What happened next showed how the campaign in Iraq was often won not by one spectacular strike, but by patient, cumulative hunting. To understand why that raid mattered, you have to understand the enemy it targeted. By early 2006, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's organization had become one of the most dangerous insurgent forces in Iraq. Its bomb makers, facilitators, couriers, safe houses, and media men formed a loose but adaptive network stretching through the belts around Baghdad. Coalition forces could kill individual gunmen, but killing gunmen was not enough. The real objective was to find the men who connected cells to money, explosives, movement routes, and leadership. That was where Task Force Black, the British Special Operations component working ever more closely with Joint Special Operations Command, became critical. The SAS approach was not simply to smash targets as they appeared. It was to build a chain, find, fix, and finish. Each arrest, each laptop, each handset, each scrap of paper had to lead to the next door. That was the contrast in Iraq in 2006. Technology mattered, but technology alone did not solve the problem. The target was not glowing on a map. It had to be reconstructed from behavior, habit, and human error. And as the net tightened around Yusfia, the raid that followed would show how that method could succeed where repeated pressure alone had not yet delivered the result. What made that hunt different from the simplified version often told afterward was that the breakthrough did not come from some magical piece of hardware. In April 2006, Coalition Special Operations Forces were already running an intense campaign in the Baghdad belts, the ring of farms, market towns, canals, and safe houses surrounding the capital. Earlier raids by B Squadron SAS and Delta Force on Al-Qaeda in Iraq targets near Yusfia on the 8th and the 13th of April had killed several suspected foreign fighters and helped sharpen the intelligence picture. But they had not yet delivered the one capture that could open the network from the inside. The target set was becoming clearer, yet the manhunt still depended on assembling fragments into certainty. That is the point the title has to capture carefully. Delta Force had not failed in the broad sense. American Special Operations units were central to the wider pressure campaign, and Task Force 145 had already spent months hunting Zarqawi's organization across Iraq, often coming close without sealing the final chain. Even official U.S. accounts after Zarqawi's death described a long pursuit marked by repeated near misses before actionable intelligence finally converged in June 2006. What the SAS operation demonstrated was something narrower and more interesting. In one critical raid cycle, British operators managed to exploit the target architecture in a way that produced intelligence with decisive downstream value. The farmhouse near Yusfia was tied to a mid-level figure associated with Al-Qaeda in Iraq's local media and vehicle bomb infrastructure, a man later described in published accounts under the pseudonym Abu Musab. His importance was not that he was the top man, but that he sat in the connective tissue of the network. Human intelligence, signals intercepts, and an aerial photo grid reference helped confirm the location. That combination matters because it explains the without GPS or drones reality in proper historical terms. Operators in Iraq certainly had access to advanced coalition surveillance and navigation tools, but the decisive act was still old-fashioned target development. Phone intercepts, map reading, imagery study, route planning, and the judgment to hit the right compound at the right time. So by the night of April 16th, the raid force was not moving toward a blinking icon on a digital screen. It was moving toward a location built from accumulated intelligence. knowing that if the man inside was taken alive, the operation might do more than remove one insurgent. It might expose the path upward, toward the most wanted jihadist in Iraq. When the helicopters came in, the operation was built on precision rather than spectacle. Published accounts described the assault as a British SAS raid supported by American assets against an Al-Qaeda-linked farmhouse on the outskirts of Yusfia on April 16, 2006. The objective was not simply to kill whoever was inside, but to seize a man judged important enough to connect local bomb-making, facilitation, and media work inside the wider insurgent network. Human intelligence, signals intercepts, and an aerial photo grid reference had narrowed the target. That is what locating a target in Iraq often meant before the mythology set in afterward. Not a live drone feed solving the problem by itself, but analysts and operators reducing uncertainty until a farmhouse in the dark became the right farmhouse in the dark. The approach reflected the way elite units had adapted to Iraq by 2006. Raids in the Baghdad belts were no longer isolated direct action events. They were intelligence engines. Earlier operations on the 8th and the 13th of April had already killed suspected foreign fighters and helped clarify how nearby Al-Qaeda cells were organized. By the time the force moved on Yusfia, the raid was part of a larger chain, one in which every captured computer, document, and phone number could matter more than the firefight itself. That is also why the contrast with Delta Force has to be handled honestly. Delta operators and other JSOC units had been central to the pressure campaign in the Triangle of Death. The point is not that they had been ineffective. The point is that this particular British raid appears to have produced the kind of living intelligence haul that a manhunt depends on. Accounts of the assault say the farmhouse was defended, that several insurgents were killed, others captured, and that British personnel were wounded in the process. What mattered most came after the shooting stopped. Among the material recovered was intelligence that fed the wider hunt for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Official U.S. announcements after Zarqawi's death in June 2006 described a long pursuit that finally culminated in a strike near Bakuba. Later reporting connected that final success to intelligence chains accelerated by the Yusfia raid. In other words, the raid did not end the war, and it did not kill Zarqawi on the spot. What it did was more important in operational terms. It moved the hunt from pressure to penetration. In the exploitation phase revealed was why the romantic version of modern war is usually wrong. In public memory, elite raids are often imagined as exercises in perfect technology, as if drones hover continuously overhead and every assault force simply follows a glowing dot to the objective. Iraq in 2006 was more advanced than the wars of previous generations, but it was still full of blind spots, delays, and ambiguity. Coalition forces had surveillance aircraft, signals collection, satellite navigation, and increasingly sophisticated intelligence fusion. Yet none of that removed the need for human judgment. The target at Yusfia had been identified through the convergence of human intelligence, signals intercepts, and an aerial photo grid reference, not through some single all-seeing system. That distinction matters because the real success of the raid came after entry. The material and prisoners taken from the farmhouse were passed into the wider JSOC and intelligence exploitation system, where analysts worked through phones, media files, and captured relationships rather than just body counts. Published accounts of Operation Larchwood foresay the haul included video and imagery linked to Zarqawi's propaganda apparatus, and that subsequent interrogation of captured men helped expose links upward toward figures close to Zarqawi himself. 9 days later, Zarqawi released a video that overlapped with material reportedly seized in the raid, an indication not of magic foresight, but of how close coalition forces had come to the center of his communications network. This is where the operation became more than a tactical success. It helped convert a raid into a chain of discovery. Wired's later reporting on SOC's transformation in Iraq described a force that had learned to operate as a network against a network, turning rapid raids into continuous intelligence production rather than isolated acts of violence. The Yusfia raid fits that pattern perfectly. It was not valuable only because insurgents were killed or captured. It was valuable because it accelerated the hunt by revealing who talked to whom, who carried messages, who handled media, and who stood one layer closer to the man at the top. And that is the deeper answer to the title. The SAS did not succeed because they possessed some mystical fieldcraft that others lacked, and Delta Force did not simply fail. The wider coalition campaign had already created the pressure. But on this operation, British operators hit the right node, captured exploitable intelligence, and helped move the pursuit of Zarqawi from attrition toward identification. That shift would matter enormously in the weeks ahead, when the trail finally began to narrow toward Bakuba and toward the meeting that would end Zarqawi's war. In the following weeks after Yusfia is what gives the raid its real historical weight. British special operations in Iraq had already become more tightly integrated with the wider coalition manhunt, and the British Parliament's Defence Committee noted in 2006 that UK personnel were working with coalition forces in Baghdad even as Britain's larger conventional footprint remained centered farther south. In that environment, special forces work was less about dramatic one-off raids than about feeding a constantly updated intelligence picture. The farmhouse raid mattered because it appears to have produced exactly the kind of exploitable material and detainee access that such a campaign depended on. That is also why the title works best when understood as contrast rather than myth. Delta Force and other JSOC elements had already been driving the pressure campaign in the Baghdad belts, and earlier raids in the same area helped shape the intelligence picture that made Larchwood 4 possible. The British success did not emerge in isolation. It emerged at the moment when accumulated pressure, local pattern analysis, intercepts, and a carefully chosen raid intersected. In that sense, the SAS did not solve a puzzle that Americans had ignored. They hit the right node in a hunt that had already become increasingly precise, and they appear to have done so through disciplined target development rather than technological overmatch alone. The wider significance became clearer in June. Contemporary reporting in Britain described Zarqawi as being located after the capture of one of his close associates, with the final strike following soon afterward. Official U.S. reporting likewise stated that coalition forces killed Zarqawi on June 7, 2006 near Bakuba after a long intelligence pursuit. The exact intelligence chain remains partly obscured by secrecy, but the broad outline is consistent across published accounts. The Yusfia raid helped tighten the net, and what was taken from that farmhouse fed the process that led, weeks later, to the most important kill in the Iraq insurgency up to that point. So the real lesson was not that machines had failed and old-school fieldcraft alone had triumphed. It was that, in Iraq in 2006, even the most advanced forces still had to hunt like detectives. Grid references, intercepts, detainee questioning, imagery, and patient analysis mattered more than mythology. And once the trail from Yusfia began to harden, the campaign moved toward its final act. And that is why the raid stayed important long after the shooting ended. The British contribution in Iraq was often judged publicly through Basra in the south, but at the special operations level the war was also being fought in a very different way, through tight cooperation, fast exploitation, and relentless pressure on the insurgent middle tier that kept Al-Qaeda in Iraq functioning. Parliamentary material from the period makes clear that British forces remained engaged with coalition operations in and around Baghdad even while the wider UK campaign had a different geographic emphasis. In that setting, the SAS role was not to operate in isolation, but to help turn intelligence into tempo and tempo into collapse. The Yusfia raid fits that pattern. It did not win because it was more theatrical, and it did not matter because it produced a neat legend about British fieldcraft defeating American technology. It mattered because it struck a useful node, captured men and material that could be exploited quickly, and fed a manhunt already closing around Zarqawi's network. British reporting at the time noted that Zarqawi was found after one of his close associates was captured. American statements then confirmed that he was killed on June 7, 2006 near Bakuba after years on the run. The exact classified chain is still only partly visible, but the operational lesson is plain enough. In Iraq, the breakthrough usually came when intelligence, timing, and disciplined raiding finally aligned. So the real story is not that the SAS had no technology. It is that even in 2006, elite soldiers still had to hunt by pattern, inference, patience, and nerve. In Iraq's darkness, that was often what separated another missed opportunity from the raid that finally changed the war. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, and share.